Okay everyone, but what I'm going to talk to today is really around that transition to SaaS or path to SaaS. Now we've had clients in the previous sessions talking about their experiences around SaaS, the lessons learnt and those type of things. So everyone's aware of what Blackboard SaaS is. I might just take the time to there's a few, when we go out and we talk to clients about SaaS, there's a few preconceptions around what SaaS actually does, all those sort of things. So SaaS really is our cloud offering that really is based on AWS infrastructure. So it's using all the technology that AWS affords, and we've built this Learn platform specifically to run on AWS in that respect and run across multiple availability zones and do all those sort of things. So there's all that leveraging of the AWS capability there. Added into it is the fact that we can now deliver zero downtime updates with our SaaS platform. So any of you that are self-hosting, any of you that are using managed hosting at the moment, you know that there is a downtime every time you've got to upgrade. And we all know that our institutions, it's getting harder and harder and harder to find a suitable maintenance window to actually perform those upgrades with. I know a lot of universities have moved or have moved to many semesters, trimesters a year, and those periods in which they can take the system offline is few and far between. So zero downtime upgrades, the ability to just continue to have original. So I know there's a lot of talk around Ultra, and we've got another session tomorrow that really looks at the readiness of Ultra and are you ready to adopt Ultra. So I won't really talk a lot about that today, but it's sort of a gateway to that. So you can still continue with 9.1, the existing look and feel that you have and all those sort of things. A couple of things with SaaS, and just to show of hands, who's using our managed hosting facilities? Who's self-hosted? Managed hosted, sorry. Self-hosted? Okay. All right. For QUT, they're already going through this process, so they're well and truly aware of it. But what we do in our SaaS deployment for those self-hosters is that we actually have two main service delivery models, and that is a plus and an advantage. And with the advantage, you get access to people like Andrew, service delivery managers that help you work through your service delivery of that. On a SaaS Plus model, you really are just you're not fending for yourself. We still support you and all those sort of things, but you don't have the dedicated service delivery manager to work with you around that service delivery model and oversee tickets and do all those sort of things. There's a few other extra inclusions as well. Those that are self-hosted, I remember my days, you're probably diving deep into the database there and pulling all the information out and got your hands on that and all those sort of things. And that's possibly a concern for a lot of the operational teams when they're going into a managed hosted or a SaaS environment. The great thing about SaaS is that we provide what we call direct data access. And that is a clone of the production database that you can connect to and query, run your own queries and do all those sort of things. The real great thing about SaaS, because it's also available in a managed hosting, the managed hosting one is about 24 hours old. In SaaS, it can be as quick as 5 minutes. So we start to get into that almost or near real-time data access, which you can query and pull that information out. So it's available for you with there. Is SaaS ready? Yes. In the short answer, yes, it is ready. We've got a lot of clients on SaaS. Polymall, you've heard Polymall talked about a lot. It's one of our biggest SaaS clients. 150,000 students using it across a range of polytechnics in Singapore. And then, of course, we've got a number of Australian clients increasing on there. A couple of the ones with asterisks down the bottom there, QUT and Griffith, who are going through that process at the moment in terms of migration and a reasonable way down the track in terms of that. So just a couple of things with moving to Blackboard Learn SaaS is that if you are thinking about Ultra, and you'll see a lot about Ultra in the upcoming days at the conference, if you are considering Ultra, Ultra is only available to you on SaaS. So if you're a self-hosted or managed hosted, the SaaS is that first step to being able to enable Ultra. The process of migration does take around 4 to 6 months. So some clients take a lot longer than that. I don't know, what's one of our longest clients? Probably 12 months. So very minimum is 3, bank on about 4 to 6 if you're sort of building in some contingencies and things like that. One of the things that clients always find is internally that there is the process brings up a number of decisions that need to be made around the service, around the outage, dealing with the various stakeholders in the organisation there. So it can have the possibility of blowing out the timeline in that respect. Those that are concerned about data sovereignty, our data centres with AWS are in Sydney. So if you're an Australian client or New Zealand client, you'll be based out of our Sydney AWS centre there. So there's usually about 4 key parts to the process: plan, prepare, test, and then I call it D-Day, which is the go live and cut over. So really you're planning, and some of these things may have been done at the contract stage. So the planning process is really looking at that requirements gathering. This is where the SDM, if you've got an SDM, gets involved and starts to talk to you about some of the needs and all those sort of things. We may have other members of the team, myself or customer success, also working with the service delivery team to actually work with you on that. For customers that are using the SaaS Plus model and don't have a dedicated SDM, there is a migration PM that will sort of oversee the activities associated with your migration. But generally we see with all of our clients, any of the larger universities will have an SDM. They will currently have an SDM in managed hosting and continue that into SaaS there. In terms of that requirements gathering, and this is a very crucial stage, you saw with QUT that they had an engagement that went through and had a look at all their integrations and talk about those sort of things. The requirements gathering for the migration process, we've evolved over the time. It was originally just a simple questionnaire that went through and asked you about some key dates and whether you want to do continuous delivery or flexible deployment option and those sort of things. And what we're doing now is we're involving it into a little bit more information that really does a deep dive into your building blocks, other integrations, your authentication, and all those sort of things, and helps us to build out a picture of what your environment is. For self-hosters, that's really, really important because we don't have any visibility over your environment. For managed hosting clients, we do have a small amount of visibility, but we're not in your system all the time. So there may be things that you can tell us through that requirements gathering process that will help us to identify any specific needs that you will have during that migration process. And it will help us to have that conversation with you around all your SOAP integrations. What do you need to do with those? Have that conversation around any specific authentication and any building blocks that we don't already know about that you need to consider and all those type of things. One of the other common things, and Bill mentioned it in his session with Bill and Shelley, is around continuous delivery and flexible deployment. What is it? Well, it's 2 modes of our service delivery. And continuous delivery, as the name suggests, is that you just continually get the updates pushed out on a monthly cadence. Generally about 3 to 4 weeks prior to that, it gets pushed out to a test instance. You can have a look at what changes are coming out, and then 3 to 4 weeks later from that, it gets pushed out to production. Now, the big thing with continuous delivery is it's not like your service pack upgrades every month. That would freak anyone out. So it's actually the smaller components. So you may see that there might be 3 or 4 features come out. And when we say features, it's not like this big bang change to a feature. It might be that, for instance, when we think about any of the telemetry stuff that comes out and is available in there, it's another icon that appears on a tool. It could be like when the video feedback recording gets released in region here, it will become another configuration item on a list of configurations. So it's not going to change the entire environment every month. So it's a drip feed of features. Flexible deployment is a little similar to what you're currently experiencing with your service pack upgrades. It's different in the fact that you have predefined versions that you have to go to, and it's working on the premise that you will do those upgrades Q2 and Q4, so twice a year. Blackboard will give you 3 windows, 3 dates within that Q2 or Q4 to work to, but they're dedicated versions that you can upgrade to. Again, 0 downtime updates, so it just depends on the nature of the update. There is a few caveats to that. So if we are doing any major database structure work or any sort of other major infrastructure work, there may be a very short outage, but most of the updates are 0 downtime. So, and we do those at around about 5 p.m. local data centre time on those dates. So we're continually working with, part of my role, part of Chris Ross's role, part of Andrew's role is to translate the requirements into a US company speak. So one of the things that we're doing as well is having that ongoing conversation around those times at which upgrades are applied locally. Because 5 p.m, when we think about Australia, 5 p.m. Sydney time is 3 p.m. Western time. So changing those sort of times so that they're maybe later in the evening or very, very early morning, so that there is very little to no disruption, if at all, to your clients is one of the things we're considering about. When it comes to actually moving to SaaS and doing the migration, there's 2 migration types. So we've got course by course or course-based migration, and we've got full system migration. So has everyone heard of these terms? Yep. What are they? So course migration is where we really take an archive of a course that's in your system and we restore it in a brand new built system. Okay. So the benefits of that are that if you're migrating another system into your SaaS environment, you can bring that across course by course. If you want to start afresh, now we've heard stories, we've got a lot of clients that have had Blackboard for a long period of time. They've just been upgrading the same instance. They've got a lot of legacy content, a lot of legacy information in there. It might be time for a fresh instance and bring that across. My time in managing the services at Griffith, we did that with a couple of upgrades. We made a choice to actually start with a whole fresh instance and migrate content across, just to actually, it helps in some stages, in some ways it helps to actually clean out and start afresh and things like that. There are some significant considerations in doing that, and probably, as most of you would already know, some of those are related to the user data and statistics that are outside of the course. And of course, if you're migrating your course archives in, you've got to then make sure all your building blocks are installed and any of those other configurations are installed on the system there. So there's considerations around that. The full system migration is purely just, let's take your database, your file system, let's convert it, because SaaS does run Postgres, if you weren't aware of that. It runs Postgres as a database, so we do go through a migration or a conversion process to convert the data, and brings over all your configuration, all your building blocks, all your user data, all your course data, and all those type of things. So if you're really just if you're migrating your main system to SaaS, then that's obviously the preferred way of doing that. Now, we heard with the past couple of sessions a few different lessons learned, a few considerations with those type of things, and I just want to reiterate, I took a note of a few of them and wanted to reiterate that for those that are migrating. So, you know, considerations are really around your outage window, and that it can be a reasonable size. You know, Bill was talking about 4 days they had their outage. We've got some other clients that are looking at probably longer, depending on the size of their environment there. But You need to consider that and work with your stakeholders and your senior leaders at your institution around that outage window, and find a time that is really going to deliver minimal impact for your users. So some of those ones are fairly self-explanatory. We've heard the SSL certificates, the migration of legacy content. If you're self-hosted, it's probably not a case in managed hosted. If you're self-hosted, you might have to do some upgrades because there is a minimum version that it has to be for SaaS. So if you're running on supported versions, it should be okay anyway. So the test migration instance is a clone of production. So when you go through that test, so any of the building blocks or third-party integrations, as you've heard with the previous people, you need to consider that and disable them so it doesn't create any conflict in that. And if you aren't already, I do encourage you to get involved with that SaaS community group. So in terms of, I'll skip over the example timeline, various stages. We've talked about the stages in terms of that. The migration plan is important, and this is something that the service delivery manager will work with you on. Looking at the steps, working on the times that you would like to go live with your migration, and work back to when we need to start and when those activities all occur. It is a very, very important document, and you need to review it and discuss it and work through those things and essentially sign off on that, because that's what we're going to work through in that migration to SaaS. That's not to say that some aspects of that won't change, because we all know that with projects something pops up that we didn't account for, or something takes a little bit longer, so those dates slip. But this is essentially an agreement in terms of what work needs to be done, and an acknowledgement of who's responsible for those items there. So the responsibilities may be yours, they may be ours, there may be another party that gets involved in all those sort of things. So it's very important to work through that and get that sorted out right at the beginning there. While we're doing that, we're also checking the compatibility and all those sort of things with regards to SaaS. And when I say compatibility, there is a number of things that you need to consider, especially around your integrations. You heard with Southern Cross University that they had the snapshot controller. So the SIS framework needs to be adopted in SaaS, and you need to use that, or you can use the REST APIs to push all your data in. But just as a bit of a summary there, these are the technology changes that you need to consider when moving to SaaS. So, you can still, because it's 9.1 by default on SaaS, you can still use your SOAP web services, although it is recommended that you transition to the REST web services infrastructure. You can see there with those sort of ones, there are certain aspects that will change, mainly around the Ultra interface. So when we're thinking about institution pages and all those type of things are going to change in the way that you can access it. But for most of you, when you move to SaaS, you're going to be still using the 9.1, so you can still use SIS framework easily. You can still use your SOAP web services until you transition that across, and your building blocks and all those type of things. But as I mentioned, the database, underlying database does change. So if you have building blocks that are doing some funky stuff in the database that you probably shouldn't be, you might need to refactor those. Building block technology does allow you to create, you can use the database manifest file to create objects and do all those sort of things, so you can do it. Blackboard does support it, although they sort of support it with hesitation. But if you do have any sort of queries, custom queries that are operating beyond the standard select and things like that, then you need to check them and make sure that they're refactored to work with Postgres. With all of this, it sounds like a lot. And let's face it, your LMS is probably one of the most critical applications in your university. It's something that all your students access all the time. So it is an important piece of technology that will be migrated. It is a significant piece of work. So that means that there are resources that are required. So from an institution perspective, you may have to engage with your PMO. You will need your network guys, as you've heard from other clients that have had a few issues. There are things around the SSL certificates. You will need to have your learning management staff available to actually do some testing, engage with your academic stakeholders, learning and teaching technology group, all those type of things. And there's probably a number of internal change management boards that you have to go through and do those sort of things. So there is some work there. We all know that institutions are running tight on resources, staff are away and all those sort of things. So Blackboard is available to support you in that respect if you need that support. QUT's taken on board with the academic technology planning, so it's a case where we come in there with our guys and help you ascertain or help you assess what the extent of work is required to migrate to SaaS. We can do some building block evaluations and reviews. We can help you with your SIS integration mentoring if you need that. And I know there was a lot of discussion around the LTI and REST integrations at Dev Day. So if you're looking to get into that a lot more and look at migrating any of your building blocks or your third-party tools or your custom tools into LTIs, then we can work with you on those sort of things. So you're not alone. We can support you in that. Just lastly, the migration process, the comms plan. It's important to have a comms plan. We can help you with that, but essentially, set up an internal website with the project information, the timeline, keep your stakeholders involved, continual messaging out to your students and academics about the change, primarily because there's an outage and there might be some change with things when the system comes back up. So one thing that people are probably not aware of is that Blackboard does provide, if you can't set up an internal site with the information for your students and staff, Blackboard can provide that. We do have the facility to get some sites up very quickly that are dedicated to your institution, that can have links to resources and have information on there with the latest stuff. There is a communication and adoption toolkit, so familiarise yourself with that, and I've got the link there, Learn SaaS Com Kit. That will take you to that adoption kit, and there's some email templates. There's plenty of screenshots there. If you want to build out your own information there, you can use those screenshots to help tell your clients what's happening and all those sort of things. That's probably a little bit more around Ultra. We've also got some cohorts and customer success programs with regards to that. Okay. All right, we might just close that up here with that. So thank you very much for your time.